Welcome to the Theology of Business podcast, where marketplace Christians explore God's will and ways for business. This show features conversations with today's Christ-centered business leaders who are representing Christ faithfully in the business world. I'm your host, Darren Shear, and if you want to make your work, leadership, and company's culture more Christ-centered, you've come to the right place. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shear, and this is the show for marketplace Christians seeking to explore and apply God's will for business. On this episode, we're joined by Al Lopus. Al is the co-founder and board chair of the Best Christian Workplaces, founded in 2002, and they provide research-based measurement tools and culture change advisory services with a single vision, and that's to help Christian organizations set the standard as the best, most effective workplaces in the world, as we should be. At BCWI, Al has conducted the broadest ever employee opinion survey of Christian workers. This survey includes more than 300 churches and over 1,500 Christian organizations overall, representing 300,000 full-time employees around the world. And so their research is not just based on theory, but it is based on research. It's based on actually asking the workers. It's not just asking the CEOs how the culture, what the condition of the culture is, but asking people at all ranks of the organization. And he also publishes a weekly blog highlighting a best Christian workplace and also hosts the Flourishing Culture Leadership podcast. Al, welcome to the Theology of Business podcast.
Darren, it's great to be back. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, Al, one of my favorite stories of the impact that's been made by you, by Best Christian Workplaces, is the way that you've helped Sonic Air. And I got to interview Brad Carr about that transformation, and he was testing. I shared it in the book, the Christ-Centered Company, about how when you came into their company, they had a toxic workplace culture. And by the time they had gone through your process, tell us kind of the outcome from that.
Well, this has gone on now for several years, Darren, and Brad and his team are one of our favorite ministry partners. We call our clients ministry partners or mission partners. And it started out where Brad had a leadership team and they weren't going in the same direction. And it really caused him a lot of grief. In fact, he graphically described it that Sunday night, he just had this feeling of dread come over him because Monday morning he was faced with going to hell, as he described it. And he realized, again, after our survey and working with him to kind of identify what the issues were, he realized that, his top leadership team needed to get on the same page and move in the same direction. So he began to articulate for Sonic Air what kind of culture they wanted to have and in what direction they wanted to go in. And this happens so often that he realized that they weren't going in the same direction. And over time, over a period of 2 years, that there was dramatic change in who was in that leadership team. And then once the team that developed trust with each other and had a similar alignment in terms of direction and purpose and mission, then things really started to take off. And he went from what we call a toxic culture, a culture that's, stifled and closed and not sure what the direction is and low employee engagement. They went from that to that over time, in a short period of time, to a flourishing workplace. And I asked Brad one time, this was a couple of years ago now on a podcast, so did this have any impact, not just on your employees, but did it have any impact on your bottom line? He said, well, last year we grew 80%. I almost fell off my chair. It's like, what kind of, when a leader says that their top line and bottom line both grew about 80% in 1 year, because of the health of their culture. It's like, amen. And it's had an impact, here at the idea of theology of work. It's had an impact on how the employees are willing to receive the gospel message, just based on their interaction in the workplace. But, it's a great team, and he has really focused on, and I'll give you a couple of examples. He's given people opportunities to use their unique gifts and skills that God's given them in new ways. So, he would have somebody that, had some ideas right from the shop floor. He described somebody that had ideas relative to their website and what should be on the website. So he transferred them. He said, yeah, take over this. And that person flourished. I mean, he just expanded and was able to bring new things to the company because Brad had given him a chance to use his unique skills and abilities. And he did the same thing with a person who was, like an administrator, and moved them into human resources because of their competence and care for people. And he just, looks at and loves to, as EOS describes it, the inspirational leader, the visionary leader.
Yeah.
He's the visionary leader, and he loves to go around and find opportunities where people can grow. But yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. And Sonic Air is one of the many C12 companies, which is an organization that I know both you and I absolutely love.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's been listening to this podcast, you know who C12 is. But if you don't, they're the largest network of Christian CEOs and executives in the world. And you did a special research study of comparing C12 companies with other for-profit companies that weren't affiliated with C12, and found that more than twice as many companies affiliated with C12 develop flourishing workplaces than other for-profit companies. Why is that, do you think?
I believe it has a lot to do with C12's focus, and the focus is, that business's mission is a key part of what C12 is trying to do, and for a business to actually have a Christian purpose, especially with employees. Well, employees have to have a good experience in the workplace. If you've got a toxic workplace and there's poor leadership that doesn't have the care, the compassion, the competence that leaders need to exhibit, then they're going to have a bad experience. And if they have a bad experience, that then puts a bad light on the gospel. But if they're having a great experience, if they feel, and we've identified the 8 keys in my book, Road to Flourishing, 8 keys that build employee engagement and in the sense of well-being in the workplace. Then if they experience that flourishing type of a workplace culture, then they're wide open to hearing, well, what makes this place so effective, where people care about one another, where we all working together to accomplish something that's meaningful, and that's what we see.
Yeah. There's accountability with that.
Yeah.
When you have a higher purpose, a deeper mission for what you're doing, it's not just about making sure that the owner can take the vacation, the vacations that he wants, and buy the cars that he wants, and all those kinds of things. But it's like Paul said, so that we might not discredit the ministry. Like when your business is your ministry, I mean, that's going to raise your game. That's going to raise your standard for what's acceptable and what's not, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is, absolutely. And, I believe that if we follow the gospel as leaders, it works and good things happen, because we're responsive to God's desire and intentions. And so I've always believed, in the marketplace, and now the last 22 years in Christian, as working in Christian workplaces, including Christian for-profit businesses, that the gospel works, because God designed human beings, didn't he? I mean, so he knows how it is that we should actually behave and interact with each other for positive relationships. As heaven on earth is what he wants. Yeah. So yeah, it works.
Well, certainly no company is perfect, especially when you start working with them when they're in that toxic stage. What are some of the statements? Because when you go into these companies, people have got to know that you're having everybody, you're surveying everybody. So if it's your first day of the job, you're getting surveyed because you have a unique perspective on the culture of this organization that the CEO, the owner, might not be able to see or might not be willing to admit. But what are some of those statements that you have heard that where the employee is basically saying, "Yeah, I know they say they're a Christian company, but that's not what I'm experiencing here, or this is actually leading me away from God." Do you hear things like that in these surveys?
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, well, our survey is a combination of quantitative research where we ask some specific closed-end 5-response Likert scale questions. And then there's the open-ended questions. What makes this a great workplace? What would you like to see improved? Now, that's where we see those kinds of questions. And it's always interesting. We learn a lot from them. And absolutely, that's what we hear. And what we've seen is that there's 8 keys that drive employee engagement where people will say, hey, this place, people care about one another, they love each other, it works well. And the 8 things that we've discovered are important is that there needs to be fantastic teams. There needs to be life-giving work where people feel like they're able to bring themselves, their full selves to the workplace. Their skills, their gifts are being used in the workplace. They're in the right jobs, which leads to outstanding talent. And then there's uplifting growth where we have opportunities to learn and grow in the job. And if we're rewarded, rewarding compensation is another factor. Inspirational leadership is the most important of the 8. But employees have to feel like we're going in a positive direction, a sustainable strategy, and there has to be healthy communication. And that's where our factor analysis of all of this 300,000 employee responses tells us, yeah, these 8 things are what really drive employee engagement in the workplace. And if those 8 things are clicking, their employees are going to say, I see a positive place here where, okay, I'm open, because a lot of people have, even earlier in their career, they've worked in toxic workplaces, and there's such a difference when it's a flourishing workplace, and they're open to hearing the gospel. There's no question.
Yeah,
and at least willing to ask the questions. So, and I think as Christians, I hope we've all been asked, there's something different about you. What is it? And help me understand. And hopefully our answer is, well, it's because the Spirit of God lives in us. And that's what causes us to be different than what we might expect, what you might run into in the marketplace on average.
Yeah. Yeah. My experience has been, and this is what I've observed among other people as well, that the primary place where we're discipled is in our workplace, because that's where we spend the majority of our time. I'm curious, in your research, what impact have you noticed the company's culture having on people who work there? Not just on the culture itself, but not just the impact that individuals have on the culture, but what is the impact of the culture on the individuals that affects them and even changes them after they're gone, after they move on from the company?
Yeah. So how do people experience culture? Well, what a great question. As I think about what I've seen and what I've heard and experienced doing focus groups over and over and over again, that in flourishing workplaces, people feel like they're actually cared about, where there's a people first orientation, where there's high levels of trust between in relationships, and where people and leaders particularly are authentic and accountable, and where there's good communication, where there's collaboration between teams, and there's a positive forward-looking outlook, and where even people are able to bring ideas forward where they can actually take a little risk and for the sake of innovation. And when you have that kind of an environment, where people are all in, it's like, oh gosh, they want to contribute. I mean, I think everybody who comes to the workplace, they're not just looking for a job. They want to make a contribution that's meaningful, that has purpose. And so when you go home, and then when you go home at night after a job like that, you take that with you. You don't kick the dog. You love your family, and you're then loving your community, and trying to help out and be a part of your community more broadly. Whereas if you're going home after being involved in a toxic workplace, it's just the night and day difference. And again, we've all probably worked in some combination where that, where we've had a toxic workplace that's just highly political and stifled and closed, and where there's broken trust, and you can't trust people. There's a high level of fear. You come home and you're just drained, and there's no energy, and that impacts your family life, your relationships with your friends, and it and it causes you to not really want to get involved outside in other activities. I mean, that's been even my own personal experience.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I had a very sobering moment when one of my employees, she said, because we tend to be kind of transactional in this business,
Yeah.
I have found myself becoming more transactional with people, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
She said, and that just smacked me across the face. And it was so convicting. And I realized, that's a weakness that I have. And yeah, that's going to show up in the culture. And she's going to end up taking that home with her and starting to relate to. So, I mean, if your experience is that there's yelling that goes on in your workplace, things like that, it's going to be fairly likely that there might be some more yelling going on in your employees' homes as a result of what they're experiencing at your company. Is that what you're observing?
Absolutely. And yelling is a good example. It's when we ask the question amongst faith-based or Christian not-for-profit organizations, we ask the question: leaders exhibit the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Again, imagine rating that on your leaders on a 5-point, strongly disagree to strongly agree scale. And when the statistical analysis, when we do a factor analysis, the first question that comes out to build the most important driver of employee engagement, that's the first question that comes out. Leaders exhibit the fruit of the Holy Spirit: love, peace, patience, kindness. And when leaders do that, then that's the foundation of a flourishing workplace. And when you experience something that's not that, that's exactly what you're describing. People shut down, they don't open up. And when people don't want to be shut down, they have to feel like, and we talk a lot about, an environment of safety. If we feel safe, then we're going to be willing to contribute at a higher level. But I also think about, the community that leaders are creating in the workplace. And I love your, is it a transactional community where relationships are just based on, getting things done, or is it more of a transformational community that's beyond just transactions? And when you've got relationships built on trust, built on integrity, and those are questions we ask. Is there a high level of trust between leaders and employees? Did leaders demonstrate fairness and integrity? These are questions that we ask. And when there's high levels of trust and integrity in an organization, then you see a broader sense of community, no question. Which people are drawn to intimacy and community much more than they are when we're rejected in our workplace. Yeah.
And you all study a lot of churches as well. Have you found that, and I think I probably know the answer to this question, I'm curious your perspective. Do churches tend to have healthier workplace cultures than for-profit companies?
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot, Darren, and that's a great question. And this was interesting. In my previous role, I was the regional managing consultant for a human resource consulting firm. It's now called Willis Towers Watson. It was called Watson Wyatt when I was there. And one of the things that we did was we worked with the statewide business magazines in Washington and Oregon to measure business workplaces. The best companies to work for was the monthly publication that came out one of the months. And again, in Washington and Oregon, we had a lot of data of business results. And then I started working with creating the best Christian workplaces. And after a couple of years, I started to look at the results of, okay, so what's different between Christian workplaces and the secular workplace? And one of the key things that came out was there's less trust in Christian workplaces, and including churches, between leaders and employees than there is in secular workplaces.
Really?
And it should be the other way.
Yeah.
It should be the other way. And so I've often been asked, so why do you think that is? Why was there lower trust in Christian workplaces? And I think the standard for leadership is higher in Christian workplaces. And if people aren't reflecting, the fruit of the Spirit, as I mentioned in this question, if they're not bringing a sense of Christian fellowship into the workplace, then it breaks down. And so the expectations are higher. So as we've worked with churches specifically, what we found is, and this is broadly true in Christian workplaces, a lot of focus on vision and not a lot of focus on how things work and operational excellence. And actually, the highest correlated question that we ask in our survey is, our organization is well managed. So how would you answer the question, my organization is well managed? And that is the highest correlation to overall employee engagement, which is it's an operational question. When you put in a new program, is it well thought through? Is it going to work? Does it cause it? Because if it's not well thought through, it causes tension in relationships, and it breaks relationships, and that breaks the sense of the culture. And so, competence related to operational excellence is often missing in Christian workplaces. And the other thing is, we also don't know how to deal with conflict very well, and we have the Christian nice culture, and as a result, true relationships, the issues don't get resolved, and they just build up silently, and ultimately, of course, they explode. But so
does that mean that churches tend to score lower than businesses, or about the same?
I'd say about the same is the answer at this point. Mm-hmm. And that's based on our database. And again, we're working with over 100 for-profit businesses and hundreds of churches. And the focus on culture, I'll have to say, Darren, in churches has really changed and improved. There's, you listen to Craig Rochelle talk about leadership in churches, and culture is a key issue. You talk about the Global Leadership Summit, culture is a key issue. So over the last 20 years, it's been a huge change in terms of the church workplace and the importance of having culture and measuring. We still are the only tool that measures the health of workplace culture.
Yeah, it's improved over the last 10 years, you're saying? Yeah, just because that's where the attention has gone.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of scandals in recent history, and culture has been, toxic culture.
Yeah.
That's been one of the main accusations, right? And who's primarily responsible for that? It's the leader.
Yeah, the leaders create the culture, and oftentimes, again, what we've seen, in the past, Christian leaders, church leaders, there aren't courses in seminary about creating healthy workplace cultures, and but there's been much more of a focus on leadership and creating healthy cultures now, from my experience.
What is your definition of culture?
Yeah. So the way I like to talk about culture is it's the shared beliefs and values of a group, expressed in the way things are prioritized and the decisions are made, and above all, behaviors. So it can be intentional, or it needs to be intentional, because if it's accidental, it will go awry. So and oftentimes it's culture is what leaders allow to happen in an organization. And I'd think about when I was leading a consulting team and a couple of different offices. I used to describe, again, as a Christian, I was trying to figure out, how can I describe, I want a culture of love and mutual respect. And I felt that was a little soft, that it wouldn't necessarily catch people's attention. And I just then described it, I want to have a jerk-free culture. And people loved that idea. We loved, it was just really loved the idea. And, so I then had to describe what jerk behavior was and what we wouldn't accept. But yeah, it's what are the beliefs and the values of our group. Another way I like to describe culture is just the way we do things around here is the easier term. And in my book, Road to Flourishing, I describe it that way. It's how we do things around here. And it's amazing how even in Christian, businesses or Christian workplaces, how, even as believers, how different things are from one organization to another. But yeah, culture is established by the behaviors of the people in the group. And who creates culture? Well, it's the people with perceived authority and status, which is usually the leaders.
Yeah, that's very similar to the definition I landed on as well, which is culture is the defining habits of a group of people.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the culture, it's not just the values, but it's even the language that's used, and like you said, it's what we accept as normal. It's the types of the quality of the work that we do. I mean, all of those things, that the causes that our company gives to, and the types of causes we don't give to, those are cultural expressions. And that's what is discipling people. So a disciple is a person who has adopted the habits of that culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so your employees are disciples, and hopefully your culture is Christ-centered and is not leading people away from Christ.
And I also think of a key part of a culture is, again, the definition of employee engagement. And are people actually bringing their whole selves? Are they fully engaged in the workplace? And I think of it not only as it an employee's intellectual, but their emotional connection to the workplace, to the employer, and is there, and we see this in Christian workplaces because people have such a deep passion for the gospel, and when that passion is actually reinforced in the work, boy, it's really an emotional connection, especially in Christian owned workplaces, Christian led businesses. Let me just say, to have an employee who, they're really emotionally connected, to the employer, and hopefully because they're doing such good work, and the way they're doing the work, where they have a culture, that where things are done the way they'd like to see them.
Yeah. Well, on that particular metric, I guess most of us would assume that if you're working in a church and your church is preaching the gospel and serving the poor and all these kinds of things that are expressions of the gospel, that they might score their organization higher on that metric, as opposed to, for example, if I work at Sonic Air and I am making sure that they're providing fugitive dust solutions.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So that people's factories don't blow up because of sawdust particles and that sort of thing. Do you find that particular metric is mostly equal, or if I work in a church, do I feel more like my work matters more than somebody that is working in a factory?
When we look at the results of Sonic Air versus results in a church, you'd find for comparable flourishing workplace, it'd be similar.
Yeah.
And not everybody's called to do church work, but and I believe that it's an equal calling to minister in the workplace, to actually take your gifts, your spiritual gifts, your skills, your capabilities, your competencies, and work in the workplace. So we see people are equally engaged. I mean, to save people's lives in buildings by building fans, we might not think that's as meaningful as helping people find eternity, but also, for a lot of people, they're helping people find eternity in their workplace culture. So that's engaged. We're talking about people that are engaged. They're working with passion. They feel a profound connection to the mission, and they're helping to drive innovation so that they can do it even more effectively. Those are the things that you want. And then on the other side of the scale, and this is true in churches as well as companies, we have actively disengaged. And this is, again, you want to manage this culture so that people are engaged versus being neutral. Neutral is when, they don't give discretionary effort into their work. We all know what that looks like. But then actively disengaged. And in Christian businesses, we're seeing that 6 or 7%, and that's the same in churches, are actively disengaged, where they're unhappy at work. They make their unhappiness known. We know what that sounds like. And every day these workers they're undermining what engaged coworkers are accomplishing. And if you're neutral or disengaged, that's costing, we've found the research, that's costing an organization $16,000 a year because of that. So we're actually seeing how, well, let me say, culture impacts engagement, and then engagement impacts how long people stay and how effective they are in their job, and then that impacts customer satisfaction, which impacts loyalty over time. And as you have more and more loyal customers because people are actually providing a great service, then you see revenue growth and profitability, and not only that, but impact in terms of ability to share the gospel.
Yes.
I see that as the value chain through the process.
That's right.
Yeah.
Al, the website, bcwinstitute.com, I think you might have another URL as well.
Yeah, we've changed that. We've rebranded. It's simply workplaces.org.
Like it.
Yeah, workplaces.org.
It's a great domain. So once somebody reaches out through workplaces.org, what's like the first major step that the company is gonna go through as part of the onboarding?
Yeah, we go through a stage called discover. And we want to discover the health of your workplace culture. And we do that with our primary way of doing that is through our engagement survey. So it's for Christian-owned businesses, it's a 52-question survey of that your employees complete, and then we provide a report back and a customized executive summary to your leadership team, and that will identify exactly what the priorities could be to move forward and to help you then build. That's the second step, is build the plan for building and moving towards a flourishing workplace, and then grow as the third stage, and that is to implement the plan so that your employees will be able to grow your culture towards a flourishing culture. So discover, build, and grow is the step, but the first step is the employee engagement survey, and we find leaders find it very helpful. And back to your point earlier, Darren, you were just talking about how you were talking with an employee who was telling you about a transactional workplace culture versus a transformational one. What you did there is you listened, and you created an environment where somebody could share that with you, and you took it seriously. And that's what we find is leaders need to create ways where they can listen to their employees and in a way that's structured so that it can be actionable going forward. So, yeah.
Yes. We've got to keep those lines of communication open for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Al, this has been fascinating, and I know that our listeners are encouraged, giving us a lot to think about. Workplaces.org is the website where people can go, and everybody go take the next step, and inviting Al and his team to come in and hold up the mirror and show you what the state of your culture is, so that you can identify those areas to grow and improve, because your workplace is where people are being discipled, and that's the Great Commission, and that's the responsibility that we have for those that we influence in the workplace, is to disciple them as followers of Christ. And that's going to look different than it does if you're working in a church building. But in the workplace, that culture is what is discipling people. That's what the Holy Spirit is working through. So Al, thank you so much for spending some more time with us. Really always enjoy talking to you.
Thank you, Darren. It's really been a pleasure, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I'm so glad you've written this book called The Christ-Centered Company.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Theology of Business podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tune in for the next episode as we continue exploring God's will and ways for business.